everyone, welcome back to my class. This is Rumana Ali. I hope you all are doing well. In today's class, I'm going to explain you about the other gland, that is adrenal gland. In the last session, we have learned about one important gland, and that was thyroid gland. We have seen how the thyroid gland is responsible to secrete a thyroid hormone. We have seen the different functions of the thyroid hormone, right? Now in today's class, I am going to explain you about adrenal gland. Where do we find this adrenal gland in our body? In the human body, kidneys are present. Over the kidneys, one gland is found and we call that gland as adrenal gland. So, over at the top of the kidneys, one gland is present. That gland is called as adrenal gland. This adrenal gland shows you the two main parts. One is adrenal cortex and the other one is adrenal medulla. So, adrenal gland shows you the two parts, adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla. We have also discussed that pituitary gland is a master gland that influences the action of other glands. So, here also this one is our pituitary gland. This influences the action, the function of our adrenal gland. Okay. So, this adrenal gland is under the influence of the master gland called pituitary gland. Now, let us see the enlarged structure of our adrenal cortex, because adrenal cortex is responsible to release the different hormones in order to show the different changes in our body. Okay, we all know that hormones are the chemical substances. These are secreted at a particular time in order to show a particular change in our body, in order to maintain all the activities, all the functions in a human body. These needs to be secreted. So, when we enlarge the structure of the adrenal cortex, it shows you the three main zones. So, the cortex, adrenal cortex shows you the three main zones. We can remember the names of zones like this, G, F, R. If you remember the initial letters of these zones, you can easily write the names of these zones. So, first one is Zona Glomerulosa, second zone is Zona Fasciculata, and the third one is Zona Reticularis. All these zones are responsible to secrete some or the other hormones which regulate the functioning of the human body. So, first one is Zona Glomerulosa. This zone is responsible to release the hormones which are termed as mineralocorticoids. Okay, next one is Zona Fasciculata. This zone is responsible to secrete the different hormones and we call those hormones as glucocorticoids. And the third one is Zona Reticularis. This zone secretes the hormones which are termed as androgens. So, all these three zones are responsible to secrete different group of hormones, and that includes mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, androgens. In the mineralocorticoids, we can take an example of a hormone called cortisol, and here in the last one, androgens, we can take an example of DHEA. These are the names of the hormones that can be released by the different zones of our adrenal cortex. One more hormone can be released by the adrenal gland, which is very important, and we name that hormone as adrenaline. Adrenaline is a hormone which is also termed as emergency hormone. So, in some emergency situations, the adrenal gland is responsible to secrete emergency hormone. So, adrenaline is an emergency hormone. During some emergency situations only, in our body, the kidney shows one gland, adrenal gland. This gland is responsible to secrete a hormone called adrenaline to show some changes in order to balance that situation. We will talk about adrenaline later, but firstly we will see the action of aldosterone, cortisol and also the androgens. Okay. So, these are the different hormones that can be released by the adrenal gland of our body. Let us talk about the hormone called aldosterone. Aldosterone is a hormone that can get activated, it can be secreted when our body shows the low level of water in the blood. At the time this hormone gets secreted. Let us see what does it do. While learning about excretory system, we have seen the role of aldosterone. Let us recall that only. We know that when the water enters, when the filtrate enters into the Bowman's capsule, it contains some waste material in it. Along with the water, some waste material is also present. Then it is reabsorbed by the blood in PCT, and then it will move to the loop of Henle. Then from the loop of Henle it reaches the other region called DCT. So in the distal convoluted tubule, some channels are present like this. We name these channels as sodium potassium pump. These channels can get activated by the action of aldosterone. So directly aldosterone will not get secreted into the blood, but there are some other substances, there are some precursors like angiotensin. So angiotensin substances are responsible to make the secretion of aldosterone. Once the aldosterone gets secreted, it activates the sodium potassium pump that are found in the DCT, that is in the distal convoluted tubule. When the sodium potassium pumps open at the time, one mechanism is going to happen. We all know that mechanism. If this is our sodium potassium pump, then here 3 sodium ions will move out and 2 potassium ions will come in. So in this way, potassium ion concentration gets increases in the DCT and sodium ions will move out and it will goes into the blood. We know that ions are the water lovers. So whenever the sodium is moving out of the tubule, when it is going into the blood, at the same time water will also move along with the sodium. So water can be taken from the filtrate by the action of aldosterone. In this way, we can handle the situation where the water is not present in an enough amount in our body. So in this way, aldosterone shows its action by activating the sodium potassium pumps. When the sodium potassium pumps get activated, at that time sodium ions will move out of the filtrate. In that filtrate, water is also present. So along with the sodium ions, water will also run back to the sodium ions into the blood. In this way, water can be written to the blood, and the range of the water, level of the water can be maintained in our blood by the action of a hormone called aldosterone. So this is how the aldosterone works in our body. So the aldosterone works in this manner, and it also helps when the sodium potassium pump gets activated, when the sodium along with the water moves into the blood. Ultimately, the urine which is formed is not more. So the volume of urine can be maintained by the action of aldosterone. One thing is, water is getting back, it is moving back into the blood, and the other thing is the volume of urine can also be maintained by the action of a hormone, aldosterone. So this is how the aldosterone functions in order to maintain our body, in order to regulate the amount of water into the blood. Let us talk about the other hormone, that is cortisol. So cortisol is a hormone that is secreted by another zone of our adrenal cortex, right? Cortisol helps in increasing the level of the glucose in our blood. But we have seen that insulin and glucagon are the hormones that are responsible to regulate the glucose level in the blood. Besides these two hormones, cortisol also plays a crucial role in increasing the glucose level of our blood. So what does it do? Let us see. Cortisol is also called as stress hormone. Whenever a person is in stress, at that time, this hormone gets released by the gland. This hormone gets secreted by the gland called adrenal gland. Here, stress, it doesn't stand for like you are going for an examination and you are having a lot of stress, a lot of tension in your mind. That is also one type of stress. But the other forms of stress are if you are feeling too hot, if your body temperature gets increases, if you are walking, if you are doing exercise, at that time also a stress can be seen in your body, a stress can be generated in your body, and at that time the stress hormone called cortisol can be released. So during the situations, during some stress conditions, we need a lot of glucose in our body. So this cortisol helps you to give the glucose into the blood, to regulate the level of the glucose in our blood. It helps in increasing the level of the glucose in the blood. We all know that liver, in the liver glycogen is present, which is a source of glucose. Lipids are also found, proteins are also found, right? In the previous classes, we have learned about the growth hormones and thyroid hormones. Growth hormones are also responsible to increase the glucose in our blood. Thyroid hormones are also responsible to increase the glucose level in the blood. But these two hormones are not involving the breakdown of the protein to get the glucose, because protein is required for our growth, and growth hormone and thyroid hormones, they both are responsible to regulate the growth of our body. Thyroid hormone is very, very important for physical, sexual and mental growth of an individual. So it does not allow the protein to get breaks down. But here in the case of cortisol, you can see that in addition to the glycogen lipids, proteins will also undergo the breakdown process to form glucose. Cortisol is not influencing the growth of an individual. It won't show any activity to regulate the growth of an individual. It just helps in increasing the glucose level. So in this way, glycogen, lipids, proteins, all these are going to be broken down. When the glycogen breaks down, we call this process as glycogenesis. This will forms the glucose, and the glucose can be transported into the blood. Likewise, lipids and proteins can also be broken down. This process is called as gluconeogenesis in order to increase the level of the glucose in our blood. In this way, the cortisol helps in the processes like glycogenesis and gluconeogenesis to form the glucose. When the glucose enters into the blood, automatically the level of the glucose in our blood gets increases, and we can handle the stress situations. And whenever the proteins broken down, this process is called as proteolysis. It breaks down into the glucose. But in the case of thyroid hormone, it won't allow the protein to undergo a reaction called proteolysis. Protein will come into the blood in the form of amino acids, and these amino acids are going to be taken by our cells to form a chain called protein. So this won't happen because of the proteolysis. Proteolysis occurs due to which the proteins gets converted into glucose, and the glucose level automatically gets increases in our blood. This is how the stress hormone is helping an individual to maintain the situation, to show the changes in your body in a particular situation. Now, besides this, cortisol is a hormone that acts as an anti-inflammatory agent. It acts as an anti-inflammatory agent in case of rheumatoid arthritis. how the inflammation is going to happen in our body, how the internal organs gets inflamed. We have already seen that WBCs are responsible for the inflammation of any part of our body. Mast cells are present. That mast cells releases a substance called histamine, which allows the inflammation of any of the organ, right? So, WBCs are responsible for the inflammation, but cortisol, as they are acting as an anti-inflammatory agent, they suppresses the activity of WBCs, and WBCs, white blood cells, are very important for our body. They act as a policeman. They fight against the different diseases, right? They provide immunity to the body of an individual. So, if the activity of the WBCs is getting suppressed by the action of cortisol, then we can call this cortisol as immune system suppressant. Immune system suppressor is our cortisol. So, whenever we are in any stressed situation, at the time cortisol is released, it acts as an anti-inflammatory agent, and ultimately it suppresses the activity of our immune system. So, when our immune system stop functioning properly, body of an individual will not show particular response against the different things, against the different situations. So, in this way, if a person is suffering from the stress, a stressed hormone is released, that is called as cortisol, which suppresses the activity of our immune system, and due to the suppression of the immune system, our body will not work in a proper manner. So, this is how the cortisol works. In one hand, you can see that it increases the level of the glucose in the blood, and on the other hand, it acts as an anti-inflammatory agent which is responsible for the suppression of our immune system. Okay, so this is about a hormone called cortisol, which is also termed as stress hormone. Let us see the action of androgens. Androgens are the hormones which are responsible to exhibit the male secondary sexual characteristics. They are responsible to produce secondary sexual characteristics in the body of the males, but this hormone can be found in both males as well as in females. This hormone can be present in both males and females. In the males, they are responsible to secrete another hormone, that is testosterone, for the development of secondary sexual characters. But in case of females, this androgens will not be present in its own form, in its original form, but they are going to convert it into some other substances, some other hormones which are termed as estrogens. So, androgens will get converted into estrogens in the body of the females, and these estrogens will secrete the different hormones like progesterone and others, which develops the secondary sexual characters in the females. If they are not getting converted into estrogen, then in that case, females will show some of the characteristics that are alike with that of the man. As the male hormones are increases in number, when they get increases in number in the body of the females, then automatically the females will show the characteristics like that of the man. The growth of the beard and the voice, the coarse voice, the voice becomes hoarse. So, these are some of the things that you can observe in the females if in case androgens are not getting converted into estrogen. But in almost all the females, the androgens, they get converted into a hormone called estrogen, and this estrogen is responsible to regulate the functioning of the different organs in the body of the females. Let us talk about an important hormone that is secreted by our adrenal glands, and that hormone is adrenaline. Adrenaline is a hormone which is also termed as fight or flight hormone. It is also named as an emergency hormone. For example, if any barking dog is running back to you, at the time in your body adrenaline get releases. So in that way, in some emergency situations, suddenly a hormone is released by the adrenal gland, and that hormone is our adrenaline. So how the adrenaline is getting secreted? It is getting secreted by the pituitary gland only, because pituitary gland is a master gland that helps in influencing the secretion of adrenaline hormone. So here from the brain, the nerves are coming, they carries the information, and this nerve sends the information, transmit the nerve impulse to another one. So here we can see the synapse, and the second nerve will move to the different organs of our body, like it moves to the heart, and there it releases some chemicals. We call these chemicals as epinephrine or adrenaline. So in this way, neurotransmitters get released by the nerve cells towards the different organs of our body in order to handle the situation. Okay, so when the neurotransmitter called adrenaline gets releases, our heartbeat suddenly gets increases. So it acts on the heart, and our heartbeat gets increases by the action of adrenaline. This is released in the form of neurotransmitter. Neurons are responsible to secrete some chemicals. That chemicals are called as neurotransmitters, and here the chemical is adrenaline. Now, one more nerve will come. It will also show synapse, and then the other neuron will goes to the small intestine of our body, and it stop its activity. So whenever we are in some fight or flight situation, in that case our heartbeat gets increases, we sweats, our body starts sweating, and even our digestion stops. So how it gets stops? Due to the release of neurotransmitters. So adrenaline will also released by the nerve cells in the small intestine. So this adrenaline stops the digestion, stops the activity of small intestine. In this way, it prevents the digestion of the food. Now this is how we face the fight or flight situation, and whatever the neurons getting releases during this situation, we call that neurons, that nerve cells forms a nervous system called sympathetic nervous system. We have already learned about these different nervous systems in the last chapter. So when a person has to comes back to its original situation, at that time what happens? Some other neurons will come from the brain. It will goes to the different internal organs of our body, and it will release some other chemical substances, some other neurotransmitters to normal the activity of the internal organs. So the substance or the neurotransmitter which normals the activity of our different organs, that is called as ACH. ACH means acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that normals the activity of the different organs in the human body. So when you see the action of acetylcholine and adrenaline, they are opposite to each other, right? Adrenaline forms the sympathetic nervous system. The neurotransmitter which gets releases during the fight or flight situation, that forms our sympathetic nervous system, and the neurotransmitters which gets releases to normal an individual, to normal the activity of an individual, we call that neurotransmitter as acetylcholine. So they oppose each other. You might have heard the name of the hormone called noradrenaline. You might think that noradrenaline functions in an opposite manner when compared to the adrenaline, but it is not so. Adrenaline functions in an opposite way to the acetylcholine, but when we talk about noradrenaline and adrenaline, both functions in a similar manner, right? So one neuron, when it comes, when it acts on the adrenal gland in some emergency situations, at the time, here the adrenal cortex is present. In the adrenal cortex, some specialized cells are present. You cannot find any synapse here. Directly one neuron will come. It will not release any chemicals. It will not release any neurotransmitters. Instead, it stimulates these cells to release some chemicals. So here the hormones are released. In the above situation, we have seen that adrenaline is released in the form of neurotransmitter. But here in this case, adrenaline is getting released in the form of hormone. So these cells releases a hormone called adrenaline. It also releases noradrenaline. Both of them get mixes into the blood and the blood circulates throughout of our body. So it acts on the targeted organ to influences the activity of these neurotransmitters. So this is how the adrenaline works. And whenever the adrenaline releases in our body, it gets secreted in our body. At that time, some changes you can see. And that changes includes increase in the level of the glucose, increase in the consumption of oxygen, increase in the amount of ATP, increase in the breathing rate, heartbeat gets increases. So all these things are happening. All these things you can see due to the secretion of a hormone called adrenaline into the human body. Whenever a dog is barking and running after you, you get scared. At that time, your heartbeat, it gets increases. You breathe many a times. That means your breathing rate gets increases. In that situation, you need a lot of oxygen. When a lot of oxygen enters into your body, at that time, glucose, it gets mixes up with the oxygen, and ultimately it increases the release of energy. So ATP is also getting increased, right? Besides this, a body of an individual sweats. The person starts sweating, and you can also see the piloerection. Here piloerection means goosebumps. The erection of the hairs you can see, which are called as goosebumps. We can also term it as piloerection. And besides this, pupillary dilation can also be seen. Our pupils start dilating. So all these changes occurs in our body to face fight or flight situation by the secretion of a hormone called adrenaline. So here we have learned about some of the hormones that are secreted by our adrenal gland. That's all for today. Thank you.